Hi, this is Benoy Thanjan, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast, and also the founder and CEO of Renew Energy. Renew Energy, we're a solar developer and consulting firm. We've developed more than 100 megawatts of solar projects across the US, and we help clients execute clean energy projects with confidence. We act as your owner's rep, overseeing developers, EPCs, and financing partners to de-risk your project and keep it on schedule. We also provide development as a service, supporting origination strategy and execution so you can advance projects without building a large internal team. On the renewable energy credit side, we offer REC brokerage, REC asset management, and custom renewable energy credit research, helping clients understand pricing, policy shifts, and long-term market dynamics. In addition, we provide new market analysis and financial modeling to evaluate opportunities, assess project viability, and support investment decisions. To learn more, reach out at info@renewenergy.com. That's info at reneuenergy.com. We'll also have information on the notes of the podcast as well. Let's get into it.
My feeling is often that I've had failures, that I've done a lot of things that didn't work, but you just have to try again. And also, you're approaching clients and you're doing your best and think that you have a really good sales pitch and you just get a turn down. So you must not be sad about all the turn downs you potentially will have. You must rather try again.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited to have Jarand Rystad on the Solar Maverick Podcast. He's the CEO and founder of Rystad Energy, a company that he founded in 2004 with the original vision to create a consistent granular data set of all global oil and gas fields. 21 years later, the company has grown into a world-leading energy intelligence data advisory firm known for bottom-up data-centric insights, covering the entire energy spectrum and helping clients across all sectors to make better informed decisions. Jarand, I'm excited to have you on the Solar Maverick Podcast. Thank you for making the time. Obviously I took bio from your LinkedIn profile, but it would be great if you could talk about your background and, Rystad Energy.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Well, background, I'm a physicist, astrophysics, so I did a lot of computer simulations and all of that back in the time, and I continued to be a data nerd when I worked in McKinsey company as a consultant in the 1990s, and then working a lot with oil and gas portfolios, and I wanted to make even better forecasts than what I could find there. I saw that there were some systematic biases in all of the basis. I started Rystad Energy to be able to basically, as I said, do better forecasting of energy assets. And in the start, yes, it was on the oil and gas, as you mentioned, but I didn't call the company Rystad Oil and Gas. I wanted to call it Rystad Energy because I knew at some time in the future it would be an energy transition and I wanted to be a part of that as well. And that happened, of course. We are in the middle of the energy transition as we speak, with more investments this year in the new energy sources than in the old energy sources globally. And so now we are in all parts of the energy system, and there are also all parts of the world. We are now 35 offices globally, and we are approaching 900 employees. And yes, we are really excited to talk about all aspects of the energy system. So happy to be here.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great explanation of the company and what you do. Can you also maybe talk about too, most of our audience is in the US, but we obviously have a large international crowd. Like, can you talk about what sort of research you're focused on the US markets? Obviously, it's a big market. There's a lot going on too.
Yes, absolutely. And our main hub is in Houston, but we also have a large office in the Empire State Building in the New York. And we also have a smaller office in Washington and Washington, D.C. at the West Coast. Of course, we are in Calgary as well in Canada. And in Houston, well, most of the activity, I would say, still is within the oil and gas space there, with a lot of work on the shale gas and the infrastructure and all the shale wells, and we're trying to model that in great detail. But increasingly also we are engaged in the power system and all the different power generation assets, including solar and wind, and also battery storage. So increasingly, that is the focus for what they're doing. And recently, I've been working a lot as well on feeding data centers with power, both in the West Virginia and that part of the country where it's really all the traditional data center hubs are, but also now increasingly in Texas and other places where we see a combination of solar batteries and gas generation is sourcing a lot of the new power centers there. The data centers, yes.
Definitely. These are all exciting topics, and it's interesting to get your sort of insights on the energy transition and what you're seeing. Obviously, we've seen a lot of, as you mentioned, new energy come online, specifically solar, wind, energy storage. We're obviously seeing more energy storage as batteries get cheaper. How do you see like the global, even maybe let's just focus on the US or global, whatever you prefer, energy evolving over the next 5 to 10 years, and what role will solar and storage play in that shift?
Let me first take the big picture. And if we then go back like 15 years ago, I just had in my drawer here now the World Energy Outlook 2008, and I looked in that. And then they forecasted that solar generation in 2025 would be 200 terawatt. And the cost would probably have come down to $2,500 per kilowatt, or $2.5 billion per gigawatt if we're developing that. So the truth is that we are not at 200 terawatt hours, but at 2,700 terawatt hours, or 13 times more than what we expected just some 15, 17 years ago. And the cost is at $500 in the utility scale, the best solar facilities today. So only 1/5 of what was forecasted in that 2008 report. So this just shows that the big picture is that on solar particularly, but also in general on renewables, we are far ahead from where we expected to be 10 to 15 to 20 years ago. If you look at the more recent development, even from 2022, we just looked at our forecast then, because 2022 was really the green hype. Everybody wanted to be in the green. Companies then invested in them, and it was a lot of optimism on behalf of green energies. And since then, the green hype has disappeared in the stock market. Shares are down more than 50%. What was policy tailwind has become a policy headwind, etc. So there's been net kind of negative news flow around the green energies over the last 3 years. But if you look then at the forecasts we made in 2022 versus where we are today, we expected in 2022 that solar will grow from 1,000 gigawatt already installed in 2022 to 1,800 this year. We are actually at 2,400 gigawatt. So still we are above the forecast, despite all the headwind and all the news that are not really positive in terms of these energy sources, So, but in terms of onshore wind, we are just at the expectation. In terms of offshore wind, we are 25% behind. And in terms of hydrogen and CCUS, we're about 35% behind. So some parts of the clean tech has been faster, especially solar. Some part has been slower, like the last I mentioned. But what really matters is solar, because solar is by far the largest new source of energy. And in total, we are adding solar this year at about 650 terawatt hours globally, which is, as I said, above all expectations. And most of the new energy that is entered to the global energy system this year is solar, actually. So it is a very, very important part. However, and then I have the big however, because we have added almost too much solar in very many markets, that it has become that we're drowning in electrons, especially in the spring and in the fall and in the middle of the day. We cannot absorb all these electrons. And then we have this cannibalization happening, that we are basically, the capture prices has gone down. And then we have a new situation that creates kind of a rather need for storage. Ask me to elaborate on that or whatever. So let me hear a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a lot of great information, and that's great to show like the comparisons with the forecast from 15 to 17 years ago to now, and then which fuel sources have, taken off and which hasn't. Obviously, like the cost declines in solar has been, the main reason why, and the efficiency of the panels, which they call, I guess, Swanson's law, which is similar to Moore's law in computing. Yeah, can you talk about like how energy storage is a great solution for like intermittent power sources like solar, and basically when you have an overbuild, right? As you mentioned, in certain obviously seasons and also certain hours where you're getting, obviously a lot of electrons coming in. We've seen that actually like California with the duck curve, and then
Yes.
actually changing the pricing to time of use because
Yeah.
there's too much coming online. And also, are you seeing too the same cost declines and efficiency of the batteries as we're seeing with solar
Yes.
panels?
Yeah. I think if you look at Western Australia, China, Europe, California, some other parts of the US are just until now, the market has more or less been able to absorb all these new electrons because they have had flexible generation either from gas assets or from hydropower. And the more you have of gas and hydropower, the more flexible and the more ability you have to absorb all of these new electrons. But we're reaching now, just now actually in 2025, the pain point with saturation of solar, that we don't any longer have that flexibility to integrate even more solar. And we're seeing a lot of curtailments. In parts of China, we have more than 5 to 8% curtailments in half of the states of China, for example. And also, in Western Australia and some parts, it's been negative prices from 8 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, etc. So we are just now reaching this stage that we must take a break in a way in solar deployment and rather ramp up storage. And this is what is happening now. If you look at 2025 in, for example, Europe, I just looked at the figures. Solar, it's still very high, but it's been fairly flat on the margin, slightly negative development, -5%. So it's 65 gigawatt of new solar coming into Europe this year. However, batteries are taking off and has been more than double and is most likely going to land at 16.5 gigawatt of batteries. And then it could be 2 hours or 4 hours, different durations of these batteries. And we see the same in China's batteries. They had an ambition to reach, I think it was 180 gigawatt by 2027. But they have actually speeded up that deployment, and most likely they will be able to reach this level by the end of 2026, based on the visibility we have on the market now. And I can go on now with the batteries in a lot of the markets. So this is really where we see the fastest growth is happening. And it's really the enabler for the grid to stabilize and to be able to have secure and affordable energy electrons, then. So this is quite natural. It's been extremely fast growth to 2025. I think we will see a flat to slightly declining solar for a few years, but with a steep ramp up storage, which again, longer term will enable a new growth curve of solar. So I think that is the big picture if you're looking at this. And wind has actually been more robust for negative prices. It's less kind of effect of cannibalization is not so strong in wind. It's more variation across weather systems, etc. And it's more also partly opposite correlated with solar. So the wind capture prices have been typically 20% below at 80%, while solar has been down to 80% below the average price, which is no money to be earned then, especially in May and June this year in Europe, we saw that. So wind has actually been increasing, onshore wind, for example, in Europe this year as well, 18%. So the latest information about what is happening.
Yeah, that is really helpful. I appreciate you explaining, and also from world perspective, and then, summarizing obviously so much data, right, to clear and concise. So I really appreciate you doing that. And then, like, beyond, we've been talking about solar and batteries, like, which technologies do you believe will define the next phase of the energy transition?
No, I think everything for the next 2 to 5 years will be about storage, about being able to cope with the intermittency. So we need to stabilize the grid, and batteries has many functions. Of course, you have the day to evening arbitrage.
Sure.
But you also have the frequency stabilization, in the millisecond level. But you also have that capacity for this short duration, the 30 seconds to 3 minutes market that can provide battery capacity. Even without using it, you can earn quite good money on just offering that capacity, etc. So I think this is really now where we need. Some countries are already ramping up quite fast. Some are lagging. Some countries have been too slow in updating their regulatory environment. In some countries, it's not even legal to connect solar battery plant to the grid because it's not defined in the legislation because it's not been updated yet. So this is where the bureaucrats really need to speed up and enable this very needed storage that is coming in. Batteries is not the only. We see quite big ramp up. Some places now on pumped hydro as well. And also some new technologies coming that it could be pressurized water, instead of having water basins, you could actually pump water into the ground. But also we see geothermal storage of heat. And that can even be a seasonal solution. We see, for example, in the Nordics, solutions like that you're heating up the rock in the summer from excess electricity and heat that you have, for example, in connection with waste incineration plants. And then you have to burn all the waste also during the summer, but you don't need the heat during the summer. And what you're doing then is that you're making water wells and you're heating up the rock. And hot rock remains hot until the winter. And then you're reversing this water flow system and you're using that summer heat from burning waste. You're using that in the winter to heat buildings. So this is more than 100 projects now in Norway, for example, which is developing these kind of technologies. So I think all these long duration storage technologies is really where we will see the most innovation and the most interesting things happening in the next 5 years.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you mentioning what you're seeing in the markets. And then obviously, like lithium ion has been really the standard for energy storage. Obviously, there are a lot of other technologies out there for energy storage. Are you seeing any other technologies becoming more popular, or is it primarily lithium ion right now?
Yes, let me mention one other part of LFP batteries, but also traditional NMC batteries, namely used car batteries, electric vehicles. And now we have had electric vehicles for 10 to 15 years in many geographies, and you're starting to see those cars being scrapped. But the batteries can still live for many years. And we have seen some applications now where we're just basically taking out all these batteries, or stacking them and using them as battery energy storage systems in the grid. And they can actually have a long life after they have done their job as a car battery. As a car battery, they're optimized to be able to take out a lot of force to accelerate the car, very fast. That is degrading the battery quite much. But if you are using it slowly in a grid system, it can actually last for much longer. So we are seeing that some of the most cost-efficient, capital-efficient battery energy storage systems are based on used car batteries, which I think is a quite interesting concept now. And I think increasingly this is also something we will see being deployed. And then you can really create a very nice cocktail. You can use solar plus batteries plus gas-fired power plants, especially if you are places where you have a stranded gas. And then you can see very inexpensive power solutions, for example, to feed data centers.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting perspective. I appreciate you sharing that. Obviously talked about data centers, and can you talk about, like, I don't know if you want to focus on the US, but there's the whole concept that there's not going to be enough energy for the data center or AI revolution. I think Sam Altman from ChatGPT said that's the biggest risk, is that there won't be enough electrons in the US compared to China, which has embraced, obviously put a lot of energy online, specifically renewable energy, solar and storage. I know you mentioned probably China is probably one of the most aggressive countries with energy storage deployment. It would be great to get your perspective. I know I asked you like multiple questions.
Yes, now in the US is where you're feeling this potential conflict between power needed for data centers and power needed for kind of general other applications the most, because that's where we see the most aggressive kind of build out of new data centers. And data center locations matters. You need to be quite dense in space to run the big learning algorithms, for AI learning centers, etc. So you cannot spread that across the globe to the lowest cost electricity. You also need some proximity to other data centers to have efficient learning centers, etc. So that's why we see some hubs in the US But you can design it differently also to make new hubs where you have the cheapest electricity. And this is partly what we see in the US from the very high concentration of data centers in Virginia and West Virginia and the DC. We are now seeing other places popping up with new hubs for data centers where you are having this joint or this proximity in processing. But as I said, and the US consumers are used to quite low power prices, and they have been spoiled by low gas prices for many years. But compared to Europe, we can envy very low gas prices. You know, in Europe, the gas prices are about $10 per MMBTU, and in the US is like 3. So of course you have lower cost of electricity, and with the competition from data centers, you are seeing that cost going up, and that could be some challenges, you know, for the population to accept. That they could maybe point to that data centers is a part of that. But honestly, if you take more, again, the big picture, there's more than enough renewable resources in the US to build out as many new data centers and whatever you would like to do. Of course, on the gas side, you have some bottlenecks because you have the global capacity for gas generators, basically gas turbines, is today about 70 to 75 gigawatt. And Siemens and the others, they are now expanding that. So it will increase to about 90 gigawatt in 2030. So of course you can expand the gas-based generation to some degree. But if you really want to ramp up faster, renewables is the obvious solution, in combination with batteries, which is a much bigger capacity than what you just mentioned. So solar and wind and batteries together will enable you to grow much faster on this. And this is available technology, it's cheap, and it's already there. Of course, you need to find the locations and avoid acreage conflicts, etc. One new trend now is to combine agriculture and solar PV, because you can actually enhance agriculture and combine it. Some places is too much sun, you will benefit from the shadow of the solar panels, etc. So I think there's a lot of opportunities if you just look at all the options. And of course, there's also some movements around nuclear. I think that will make sense to basically prolong and rebuild some of the existing nuclear facilities, and you have some options there. You have some shutdowns due to some hurricanes and other things you have had that was destroying these facilities a few years back, and you can bring some of them back. But I think for new SMRs, etc., it could be a longer runway to get all of that up and running. So if you rely on that only, I think you would put some capacity at risk. So I think you should use the technologies that are already available and inexpensive, which I just mentioned. So unnecessary to feel that you are in a power squeeze, because there's so many resources available in big, wide country like US with so many renewable resources.
Yeah, definitely. That is a really interesting answer and great perspective. You know, I think a lot of, I guess, frustration has been in the US related to the current administration and them not being, how can I say it, repealing or making it more complicated and adding tariffs to developing, you know, solar and wind through the big beautiful bill, through tariffs, through changing the safe harboring rules, and then FIAC, which is for an entity of concern. Also, there's been complications with permitting on the municipal letter. There's like, what are the challenges of that too? Like when you have maybe an administration that's not pro solar and wind, and
just need to be pragmatic. Of course, you need to maintain environmental restrictions, all of that. You should never cut a forest or whatever, any wild nature, I think, to build any renewables, and you don't need to do it. You can use agricultural land, which is excellent to combine with renewables, as already mentioned. So I'm very for protection of nature, etc. So don't touch that. But already destroyed nature in a way, which is agricultural land, and which is also facilities like roads and other places, you can actually combine with renewables. So here it's about being economical sound and pragmatic. Look at the resources you have, look at new technologies to deal with intermittency, and you can have safe and inexpensive development using the latest technologies. So that shouldn't be a problem, and you should be pragmatic and economical on these matters, I think.
yeah, definitely. I think you're going to still continue to see development, especially in solar, even with the more complicated development, I guess, way to develop projects here in the US. And, you know, I think there's a huge opportunity, as you mentioned. We use the term agrovoltaics as, you know, putting solar on, farmland and then combining it with crops, or using land that's more, it's not good farmland, and then supplementing the farmer's income.
I even saw one scientific article that mapped this for cattle. Actually, that the thriving of cattle were larger if they had some shadow that they could hide under, and the stress level was smaller. So, of course, you need to look at every business case, and maybe it's not a general rule that will apply, but this is an area where I expect a lot of innovation. And of course, US in general is very famous for innovation, looking at new opportunities. So I would expect a lot to happen on that in the US. Let me mention one other technology, then we are back to natural gas. And then you have this solid oxide fuel cells that are using methane as an input, and using that in a fuel cell to have a very high efficiency fuel cell production that you can also use to produce power. And in some cases, that is actually also very well could go hand in hand with carbon capture, because as a part of this fuel cell, methane-based fuel cell, you will have a high concentration of CO2 in one end of that, and which is easy to capture. So these are also new technologies. So by that, I just mean you have to look at all technologies with open eyes and with kind of economical glasses on, rather than predefine what kind of technologies you like or dislike.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point. I appreciate you explaining as well fuel cells to our audience. And, obviously with the energy transition, there's going to be multiple fuel sources that come online to meet the demand and obviously the changes that we're seeing. Yeah. So the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. You're a Maverick. You started Rystad in 2004. What advice would you give to energy entrepreneurs or people who want to start their own business in the energy sector? And what have you learned now for being, having your own business now, like for 21 years?
First, I think it's, we are going through a big transition of the energy system just now towards electrification in general. And a lot of the previous very separate platforms will be merged into one new platform, which is electricity. Just one illustration is, for example, how a company like Octopus is using cars as with a vehicle to load, that they're using that as virtual power plants. So the car is not only something to bring you from A to B, but it's also part of the energy system. And this is just one illustration of innovation happening in the energy system. And I think there's so many opportunities still to innovate. So absolutely, all innovation will be very welcomed. Just like in the media and telecom, look at what happened in the 1990s with the internet. Everything that was very separate platforms before, newspapers was one thing, TV was one thing, communication was one thing, very separated sectors, all was merged into one common sector. And I think that is now also going to happen in the energy system. We should embrace that, and we need innovation. So please go out and do it and try many times, So as an entrepreneur, some people ask me from time to time, how does it feel to have so much success? And then I think success, my feeling is often that I've had failures. I've done a lot of things that didn't work, but you just have to try again. And also, you're approaching clients and you're doing your best and think that you have a really good sales pitch, and you just get a turn down. So you must not be sad about all the turn downs you potentially will have. You must rather try again, just pick your fights. Don't try to win if there's too much resistance one place, rather find new areas where you will be more welcomed, and just have that stamina, try different roads, and then you will have some success in the end. So good luck to all of you. And I really would encourage you to drive innovations in this new exciting energy system that we are going into.
Yeah, definitely. That is such great advice. Resiliency, and keep trying, and not get, frustrated, and continue adapting and changing, which I'm sure, I can't even imagine. I think the most successful people fail the most out of anyone, but just people don't see it. So I think that's great that you shared that. And another interesting thing is, like, obviously there's a lot of innovation. I'm curious, you talked about this a little bit. What about like residential homes, like having, battery storage systems, and then when they're not using it, selling it back to the grid as a way of like resiliency? I mean, there's so much innovation and smart energy, smart metering.
Even if you have a vehicle to load, you have actually your car. If you have a big car with a 100 kilowatt hours car battery, you can be off-grid, supply your house for like 3-4 days. So that's energy security point of view on the personal level, in a way, if you have the right system to do that. Not all the models have that yet, but more and more have it. But then you can support that innovation and maybe make a business out of it. So, because I think Americans, they want to stay independent also, and they want to, if you're combining that even with extended range vehicles that have even some charging infrastructure on top of the battery, then you could, even with a few liters of diesel and everything, you could have your own power plant for weeks. So I think you can even create that energy independence on your own for the next winter storm or whatever. There's many options now to do innovation on the residential level and combine the solar and batteries and your car and everything. So, but it's important, of course, that also government is facilitating this and creating incentives for energy storage, so enabling that the markets will be able to, for example, that you'll be able to sell surplus power, and that you will not be punished by taxes or whatever to invest in these facilities, rather the opposite. So with that could also take away the load on the grid, and you could you would avoid any kind of energy squeeze that could elsewise happen.
That's a great point too, like localized energy independence. Obviously traditionally it's been, a large plant going through electrical lines, then transmission lines to get power to the home. Have you, especially with a lot of climate events, and especially too in the US, we're seeing an aged infrastructure for transmission and distribution. You're seeing a lot more power outages. That's a great point to talk about, like localized energy independence. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about this a lot more than before.
And I think the new grid with much more batteries that automatically will come, even data centers as batteries, and hospitals, and of course your car batteries and all BESS systems, all of that will enable us to get as much more out of the grid, but also make it more decentralized also, and to make it more robust for big outages also. So this is the main trend as well. So even if we will have some increased challenges to the grid with all the intermittency of solar and wind coming in, and all the new storage technologies that are coming in big time over the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, ultimately will make the grid actually more robust, I think. So end up with a good solution 5 to 10 to 15 years down the road that also will be much more based on renewables, actually.
Yeah, this is great insight, and I appreciate, Jarand, you making the time. There's so much great insights that you provided in this interview with a lot of complex information that you're able to summarize really quickly and high level for our audience, which I really appreciate. Like, what's next for you? I mean, you've had your own business now for 21 years, or what's next for Rystad? I mean, it's pretty impressive that you have 900 employees. You're pretty much all over the world, and you bring a great perspective because you cover energy, all over the world.
No, we will just continue to grow along. I mean, with the step outs that we have done. And for example, just now we have mapped all the data centers globally. We have a very detailed data structure now, power supply to data centers, what kind of data centers, how they are connected, the fiber optics, all of this. And we are just now going to market to that. So that one new solution just to illustrate what's next, and we have other new solutions coming as well. So it's a lot of work to be done, and it's a lot of new sectors in proximity to the ones we are already in, where we will step up and provide services to all the people in both the energy markets and some of these other markets in the proximity of the energy market.
Yeah, and that's a huge opportunity, obviously, mapping the data centers all over the world. And, I think a lot of people would obviously be interested in that platform or research that you're creating. So that's great to hear. If our audience wants to learn more about Rystad Energy or you specifically, what's the best way that they could do that?
Well, I think if you just look at our webpage, you will see a lot of links to different publications we have, etc. And easy to find relevant people to talk to. And we are also publishing our own podcasts and webinars. And also, so I think it should be quite easy for people to learn more about us.
Definitely. So Rystad Energy also has their own podcast. So we'll have Rystad Energy's website, but also the podcast as well. And thank you for your time. It's been an amazing interview. I appreciate you making the time today.
No, very nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Renew Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneweenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.